So I've been sitting with this sample of the new Hermes release Barénia for a little over a week now, so I thought it's time to give some impressions. I realized just before clicking record the accent on the E, which usually turns E into A, so I imagine it's called Barénia and not Barénia as I had been saying it in my mind. This one sort of came out of nowhere. I hadn't heard about it except a few weeks before it was released. Oftentimes rumors swirl around. People find the trademark of names years in advance of upcoming fragrances, but this one just kind of popped up. It seems to be in the more mass release line of Hermes. It's at a lower price point in the same area as like a Terre d'Hermes and a H24. So it's definitely not of the Hermescence variety. It's also not the same tier as Gallo, which is quite interesting. That one sort of stands apart all by itself as being of like a higher quality and a higher price point, but neither belonging to Hermescence nor the colognes nor any other range. Anyway, so I'll cut to the chase. If I could summarize it in two statements: one, it's modern fruit chouly, and two, it's just okay. So I find it really quite strange that they should choose at this point to do a fruit chouly. My initial impression was I thought this smells like Chanel Coco Mademoiselle, the most kind of watered down, mass appealing version of Coco. So I'll spray it here. Indeed, we get a bright, kind of juicy, fruity opening. They list Miracle Berry, which is quite funny. I think that's the one that you're supposed to, if you eat it, everything afterwards tastes sweet. I think that's just a little bit of like clever marketing. It's just general berry smell. I would say it leans more towards like a darker like currant or blackberry kind of smell. It definitely goes to me in like a sort of shampooey, fruity shower gel direction, not particularly expensive or refined smelling. You can smell a bit of sort of woods underneath it and a little bit of like a rounded sweetness. I think if I smelled this blind, I would just think it's any old kind of generic women's marketed perfume found at Sephora. Now I've placed the book The Fall here just to pretend like I'm well read. No, I've actually read all of these because I'm not one generally to go all doom and gloom every time a brand has a poor new release and claim it's the death of the brand, everything's going downhill. That's often a little dramatic. Even our favorite brands have ups and downs. But I will say two recent strikes about Hermes that I find extremely disappointing, or actually we could say three. So 3 strikes, I guess they are out. The first one is they discontinued several Hermescents a while ago, and Hermes sales associates used to famously tell you Hermes doesn't discontinue fragrances. And I view Jean-Claude Elena's body of work under the Hermescence collection as a complete body of work. And if you remove fragrances from that, it sort of destroys his legacy a little bit in my mind. The second strike is they said they would never do an oud fragrance, and they recently released Oud Alezan, which wasn't even a particularly good oud fragrance. And the third strike, and maybe the most unforgivable now with Barénia, is they're chasing trends. Another well-known piece of fragrance lore is that Hermes turned down Cool Water because they said it would be too popular and they didn't want to be so mainstream. They didn't want to be so well known for fragrance. They like to keep that sort of cool, detached mystique just a little bit to the side of the industry. And I really appreciate that about Hermes. But this one seems to be chasing trends. First of all, the trend of a fruit chouly, which is quite an old and dated trend by this point, but with the inclusion of Akigala wood. Now, some people, say you shouldn't talk about materials if you hadn't smelled them alone, neat. And I have not. I'm not a perfumer. I don't deal with materials, but I've smelled many fragrances that contain Akigala wood, and I think I can tease out the element from those fragrances that is given by the Akigala wood smell. So it's sort of a rough, nuclearly long-lasting derivative of patchouli, and that's what we find in the base here. So it starts out, very fruity, fruit chouly, a little bit sweet, but already you start to smell that, what I associate as like a scratchy, rough texture. Full patchouli has this sort of earthy dankness, a camphorousness, but also a richness. It feels very rounded. Like if we think of like a Chanel Coco, the way they use patchouli there is much more dark and rounded. But here it feels a little piercing and scratchy and dry and synthetic. So let's read what they've written. The sensuality of the Hermes Chypre is revealed in a balance of strength and softness. The exhilarating signature of butterfly lily blends with delicate miracle berry. The warm trail of oakwood and depth of akigala wood highlight the unique magnetism. So yeah, it's not that they can't use these trendy ingredients, but it just feels like not only is it a boring release, but it chases trends with a very popular and very strong and very kind of like unsophisticated smell in the base notes. So who knows, maybe this will be very popular. I wonder if part of this move is due to, I believe, the huge popularity of Amouage's Guidance. That seems to have been a really big hit, and it's a lot funkier, a lot stranger and more complex than this, but it feels like this could have derived from that same idea. So it's not offensive. I would say the akigala wood, the amber woods, the scratchy base is done with a fairly light hand. It stays fairly sheer. It never feels overbearing and suffocating the way something like a Ganymede does, but it does stick around an annoyingly long time. I smelled the strip after several days, and that sort of signature trace was left at the bottom. And I think the problem for me with these materials, I do like them if they can be used properly, but oftentimes they just really stick out of the composition like a sore thumb. Or if they don't at the beginning, when you get to the base, the dry down, that's all that's left over. So then it means you have several perfumes that really in the end all smell the same. And that's what really bothers me. And that's something Jean-Claude Ellena did brilliantly. As linear as his fragrances are, I found when going through all the Hermescents and spraying them on blotters, smelling them 3-4 days later, each one was completely legible as itself. They didn't all dry down to this same kind of droning bass note. And that's a real masterstroke in my mind. So there we go, a little bit of a rant about Hermes and their new release, Barénia. Sorry, I had to pause there due to a phlegm attack. I had a flu shot yesterday and I'm feeling congested this morning. Anyway, my overall takeaway is it's really just fine. It smells very generic to me. I think maybe for the price point, it's not too bad. I'm sure there are worse things out there in the designer mass release category. But there's also a lot better things, especially from Hermes themselves. If you compare to like even a Twilly or a Jour or a Eau de Merveille or their older catalog like 24 Faubourg, those really put this to shame. This really feels like a big sellout, step in a wrong direction for me, for Hermes. So those are my thoughts on Barénia.